My daughter-in-law said, "You disgust me," at grandson's graduation dinner, but my revenge was perfect. I just smiled. I was waiting for this. I waved to a waiter, and a video started playing on the TV. I made the shrew faint when "I'm glad to have you here." Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. I've been married twice, buried one husband, and raised 3 children. At 67, I thought I'd seen every shade of human cruelty. I was wrong. The Riverside Country Club dining room buzzed with the kind of restrained excitement that only graduation dinners can bring. Crystal glasses clinked softly against fine china, and the low murmur of congratulatory conversations filled the elegant space. My grandson, Ryan, cap and gown exchanged for a shark navy suit, sat at the head of our table, beaming with the confidence of a young man who just conquered the world. Harvard Law School, full scholarship. The pride swelling in my chest felt almost too big for my ribs to contain. "Grandma Evelyn, did you see Professor Morrison's face when I gave my speech?" Ryan leaned toward me, his eyes bright with excitement. "I think I actually made him tear up." I reached over and squeezed his hand, feeling the calluses he'd earned from working construction summers to help pay his way. "You've always had a gift with words, sweetheart. Your grandfather would have been so proud." That's when the temperature in the room seemed to drop. "Oh, please." The voice cut through our moment like a blade through silk. "Let's not pretend this is some fairy tale success story." All heads turned toward Harper, my daughter-in-law, who sat rigid in her chair with that particular smile she reserved for moments when she planned to draw blood. Her perfectly manicured fingers gripped her wine glass so tightly I worried it might shatter. "Harper," my son Jason warned quietly, but she was already past the point of restraint. She stood slowly, deliberately, her designer dress catching the chandelier light as she turned to face me. The conversations at nearby tables began to fade as people sensed the shift in our little corner of the room. "You want to know what I really think about this whole charade?" Her voice carried just enough to reach the adjacent tables where familiar faces from our social circle turned with barely concealed curiosity. "This woman," she pointed directly at me, "has been playing the devoted grandmother act for years, but the truth is she's nothing but an embarrassment." My stomach dropped, but I kept my face carefully neutral. I'd learned long ago not to give Harper the satisfaction of seeing me flinch. "Mom, stop." Jason's voice held a note of desperation I'd heard too many times before. But Harper was just getting started. She took a step closer to my chair, her voice rising with each word. "You want to know what your precious grandmother really is, Ryan? She's a fraud, a pathetic old woman who can't even dress appropriately for her own grandson's graduation dinner." I glanced down at my navy dress. Conservative, well-tailored, appropriate for the occasion, but I knew this wasn't really about my clothes. "You embarrass me," Harper continued, her voice now carrying to half the dining room. "Every single time we're in public together, I have to pretend that you're not a complete social disaster. You say the wrong things, you dress like you shop at thrift stores, and you have no idea how to conduct yourself around people who matter." The silence that followed was deafening. I could feel the weight of dozens of eyes on our table, could practically hear the whispered conversations that would dominate the country club for weeks to come. Ryan's face had gone pale. "Harper, that's enough." "No, it's not enough." She turned back to me, and for a moment, I saw something in her eyes that went beyond mere dislike. It was contempt, pure and simple. "I have carried the embarrassment of being associated with you for 15 years. 15 years of making excuses, of trying to minimize the damage you cause just by existing in our lives." She leaned down closer to me, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow felt more violent than her shouting. "You disgust me, Evelyn. I look at you and I feel sick to my stomach that you're supposed to be family." The words hit me like physical blows, but something strange happened in that moment. Instead of the shame and hurt I might have expected to feel, a calm settled over me, a peaceful, almost pleasant calm. I smiled. It wasn't a big smile, nothing dramatic or obvious, just a small, satisfied curve of my lips that seemed to confuse Harper more than any tears or protests might have. I reached into my purse with steady hands and pulled out my phone. With deliberate movements, I caught the eye of Marcus, our usual waiter, and gave him a subtle nod. "What are you doing?" Harper demanded, some of her confidence wavering as she noticed my composure. I didn't answer. Instead, I watched as Marcus moved to the small control panel near the bar, where the restaurant's ambient music system was managed. The soft jazz that had been playing faded out, replaced by the distinctive sound of a video beginning to play. The large flat-screen television, mounted on the far wall, usually displaying the club's weekly events calendar, flickered to life with a different image entirely. Harper turned toward the screen, and I watched the color drain from her face like water flowing down a drain. "No," she whispered. But yes, there she was, crystal clear and high definition, sitting in what was clearly a lawyer's office. The timestamp showed a date from just 6 months ago. "So you want to completely sever all ties?" The lawyer's voice came through the restaurant's sound system with perfect clarity. "Completely," Harper replied, screen. "I don't want her to have any legal claim to contact or visitation. As far as I'm concerned, I never had a daughter." The blood left Harper's face so quickly I thought she might faint right there. She stumbled backward, gripping the edge of the table for support. "What is this?" Jason's voice was barely above a whisper. On screen, the conversation continued. "And you understand that this means she'll have no support system? No family connection at all?" "Good," Harper's recorded voice replied coldly. "Maybe that will finally teach her that actions have consequences." That's when Harper's knees gave out entirely. She collapsed into her chair with such force that it slid backward, and then she simply folded forward onto the table, unconscious. The dining room erupted in whispers and gasps, but I remained perfectly still, watching the video continue to play, watching my daughter-in-law's deepest secret broadcast to everyone who mattered in her carefully constructed social world. I had been waiting for this moment for exactly 4 months, 2 weeks, and 3 days. Ever since the private investigator I'd hired delivered that recording to my kitchen table, along with a manila folder of other materials that had made my hands shake with rage. Tonight, finally, everyone would know what Harper really was. 4 months earlier, I was arranging flowers in my kitchen when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, but at my age, unexpected visitors usually meant either someone selling something I didn't need or a neighbor with gossip I probably didn't want to hear. The man at my door looked nothing like what I'd expected a private investigator would look like. Thomas Fields was in his 50s, wearing a simple gray suit that had seen better days, carrying a worn leather briefcase that suggested he'd been in this business for a long time. His handshake was firm, but gentle, and his eyes held the kind of weariness that comes from seeing too much of humanity's darker side. "Mrs. Evelyn," his voice was careful, professional, "I believe you're expecting me." I had hired him 3 weeks earlier after a conversation with my neighbor Marlene that had planted a seed of suspicion I couldn't shake. She'd mentioned seeing Harper at a law office downtown, which seemed odd since Harper had never mentioned any legal matters to the family. Marlene's cousin worked as a receptionist there, she'd said. "Family law practice?" "Please come in," I said. I led him to my kitchen table, the same table where I'd made the call to hire him, my hands trembling as I dialed the number I'd found online. Thomas set his briefcase on the table and opened it with practiced efficiency. "I have to tell you, Mrs. Evelyn," he said gently, "what I found was more extensive than what you originally asked me to investigate." My stomach tightened. I'd asked him to look into why Harper might be visiting a lawyer. I hadn't prepared myself for extensive. Before I show you anything, he continued, pulling out a thick manila folder, I need you to understand that once you see this, you can't unsee it. Sometimes ignorance really is bliss. I looked at the folder, then back at his weathered face. Mr. Fields, I've been married twice, buried one husband, and survived raising 3 children largely on my own. I've learned that the truth, no matter how ugly, is always better than living with a beautiful lie. He nodded slowly and opened the folder. The first document was a legal petition dated 18 months earlier. As I read the header, my vision actually blurred for a moment. Petition for termination of parental rights, voluntary surrender. She has another daughter, Thomas said quietly. Chloe Phillips. She's 23 now. My hands started shaking before I'd finished reading the first paragraph. Harper had voluntarily terminated her parental rights to a daughter from a previous relationship, not because she was young and unprepared, not because of financial hardship. The petition clearly stated she was terminating her rights because she was moving forward with a new family unit and wished to avoid complications. There's more, Thomas said, and I wasn't sure I could handle more. The next document was a report from a social worker. Chloe had been 15 when Harper abandoned her, left in the care of an elderly grandmother who died just 2 years later. The girl had aged out of the foster system with no family support, no college fund, no safety net of any kind. Where is she now? My voice came out as barely a whisper. Working 2 jobs in downtown Portland, trying to finish community college. She's been completely on her own since she was 17. I stared at the photo Thomas handed me. Chloe had Ryan's eyes, the same brown that came from Jason's side of the family. She had Harper's delicate bone structure, but there was something in her expression that was entirely her own. A weariness, a strength that spoke of someone who'd learned too young that the world could be a cold and unforgiving place. She doesn't know about your family, Thomas continued. As far as Chloe is concerned, her mother disappeared from her life and never looked back. She has no idea that Harper remarried and had the life that Chloe never got to have. The room felt like it was spinning. I gripped the edge of the table, trying to process what I was learning. How did you find all this? Public records, mostly. Court documents are accessible if you know where to look. I also spoke to some people who knew them before Harper left Portland. He paused, seeming to weigh his words. Mrs. Evelyn, there's something else you need to know about why she left. I wasn't sure I could take another revelation, but I nodded for him to continue. Chloe was getting too old, too independent, starting to ask questions about her father, wanting to know more about her mother's past. According to her former neighbors, Harper seemed to view Chloe as a liability rather than a daughter, someone who might interfere with her plans to start fresh. The words hit me like physical blows. I thought about Ryan, about how much love and pride Harper showed him in public. Had that all been performance? Was she capable of loving any child? Or was Ryan just young enough still to be useful to her image? There's video, Thomas said. Video? I was able to obtain footage from the law office security cameras. Your daughter-in-law was very explicit about her intentions and her feelings towards Chloe during her meeting with the attorney. That's when he handed me the USB drive that would change everything. I watched it that night, alone in my living room, with the curtains drawn in and the door locked. Watching Harper sit in that lawyer's office and speak about her own daughter with such cold detachment made me physically ill. She talked about Chloe like she was disposing of an unwanted piece of furniture, but it was more than just the abandonment that horrified me. It was the calculation behind it. Harper had researched the legal process thoroughly. She'd made sure there would be no way for Chloe to contact her in the future, no way for her past to interfere with her new life with Jason and Ryan. She had erased her own daughter with the same casual efficiency that someone might delete old files from a computer. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Chloe working 2 jobs, putting herself through school with no family support. I thought about Ryan, the grandson Harper doted on so publicly, and wondered what would happen if he ever became inconvenient to her image. But mostly, I thought about my son, Jason, who had no idea that he'd married a woman capable of abandoning her own child. I knew I had to do something, but what? How do you tell your son that your wife is not who she pretends to be? How do you explain that the woman he loves discarded her own daughter like trash? More importantly, how do you make sure it never happens again? That's when I started planning. I hired Thomas to find Chloe, to learn everything he could about her current situation. I discovered she was struggling, but determined, working as a night shift security guard and a weekend barista to pay for her classes. She lived in a studio apartment that cost most of her income, but she was making it work through sheer will of force. I also had Thomas continue monitoring Harper's activities. I wanted to know if there were other secrets, other victims of her particular brand of cold calculation. What he found was a pattern that made my blood run cold. Harper had done this before, not abandoned children. Chloe was her only child before Jason. But she had systematically isolated herself from anyone who knew her past, anyone who might contradict the image she wanted to project. Former friends, distant relatives, even her own mother, all cut off without explanation once they were no longer useful to her carefully constructed persona. My daughter-in-law was not just selfish or self-centered. She was a predator who specialized in emotional manipulation, and my family was her current hunting ground. I spent weeks agonizing over what to do with this information. Should I tell Jason immediately? Should I contact Chloe? Should I confront Harper directly? But then I remembered something my first husband used to say. The best way to catch a liar is to let them keep talking. So I waited. I watched. I documented. And I started planning for the day when Harper would finally reveal her true nature to everyone who mattered. I didn't have to wait long. The video continued playing as Harper lay unconscious, her head resting on the white tablecloth like she'd simply decided to take a nap in the middle of her own destruction. The restaurant staff had moved quickly to clear the nearby tables, but not quickly enough to prevent half the country club from witnessing my daughter-in-law's most carefully guarded secret. On screen, Harper's voice continued with that same cold detachment I'd heard when Thomas first played the recording for me. I don't want her to be able to find me ever. As far as the world is concerned, Chloe Phillips is not my daughter. Jason sat frozen in his chair, staring at the screen like he was watching a foreign film without subtitles. His face had gone through several color changes in the past few minutes, from confusion to shock to something approaching horror. "Dad?" Ryan's voice was small, uncertain. "Who is Chloe Phillips?" Before Jason could answer, Harper's eyes fluttered open. She lifted her head slowly, mascara smudged beneath her eyes, looking around the dining room like she couldn't quite remember where she was. Then her gaze landed on the television screen, and reality crashed back into her face like a physical blow. "Turn it off," she whispered, then louder, more frantic, "Turn it off!" She struggled to her feet, swaying slightly, and lunged toward the television controls. But Marcus, our waiter, stepped smoothly between her and the screen. He looked to me, and I gave him the slightest shake of my head. "Please." Harper turned to face our table, her perfectly styled hair now disheveled, her designer dress wrinkled from her collapse. This is out of context. You don't understand." "Then explain it to us," I said, my voice calm and steady, the voice of someone who'd had months to prepare for this moment. "Who is Chloe Phillips, Harper?" The question hung in the air like smoke. I could feel the weight of dozens of conversations that had stopped mid-sentence, the electricity of social drama that would be dissected in living rooms across the city for months to come. Harper's voice cracked. She looked desperately at Jason, searching his face for some sign that he might still be on her side. "She's my daughter from before I met your father." "Your daughter?" Jason's voice was flat, emotionless. "You have a daughter?" "Had," Chloe corrected quickly. "I had a daughter. It was a long time ago, before you and I got together. It was complicated, Jason. You don't understand what my life was like then." On screen, the lawyer's voice continued the conversation we were all hearing for the first time. And you're certain you want to include the clause preventing any future contact? This is quite permanent, Miss Phillips. Completely certain, Harper's recorded voice replied. I want a clean slate. No complications from my past. Ryan pushed his chair back from the table. How old was she when you did this? Harper's eyes darted between her son and her husband. She was 15, but you have to understand. 15? The word exploded from Jason like he'd been punched in the stomach. You abandoned a 15-year-old? I didn't abandon her, Harper's voice rose defensively. She had her grandmother. She had a support system. I couldn't handle being a mother at that point in my life. I watched this exchange with the detached fascination of someone observing a carefully planned experiment. For months, I'd wondered how Harper would explain herself when confronted with the truth. I'd imagined different scenarios, different excuses she might use. I hadn't expected her to be quite this clumsy about it. But you could handle being a mother to me. Ryan's voice was quiet, but there was an edge to it I'd never heard before. What made me different? That's different. You're different. How? You just are. Her voice was getting higher, more frantic. Ryan, you have to understand, I was young when I had Chloe. I wasn't ready. But when I met your father, when we had you, I was in a completely different place in my life. I decided it was time to speak up. Actually, Harper, according to the court documents, you were 28 when you signed away your rights to Chloe. Hardly a child yourself. The silence that followed my words was so complete I could hear the kitchen staff clattering dishes in the back of the restaurant. Jason turned to look at me for the first time since the video began. You knew about this? I found out 4 months ago. I met his gaze steadily. I hired a private investigator after I saw Harper coming out of a law office downtown. I wanted to know what she was hiding. You had me investigated? Harper's pitch higher. You violated my privacy. You had no right. I had every right, I said, my voice cutting through her protest like a blade. You married my son. You became part of my family. And something about you never felt right. The video on screen was reaching its conclusion, but the lawyer's final question hung in the air like a judgment. And what should we do if Chloe Phillips ever tries to contact you in the future? Harper's recorded voice was crystal clear in her response. Tell her I'm dead. The gasp that went up from the nearby tables was audible. Even some of the restaurant staff stopped what they were doing to stare at our table. Ryan's face had gone completely pale. You wanted her to think you were dead? It was kinder that way, don't you see? It was better for her to have a clean break, to be able to move on without wondering why I left. This way, she could grieve and heal instead of spending her life hoping I'd come back. That's the most selfish thing I've ever heard, Jason said quietly. Selfish? Harper whirled on him. I was trying to protect her. I was trying to do what was best for everyone. No, I said, my voice cutting through her hysteria with quiet authority. You were trying to protect yourself. You wanted to start fresh with Jason and Ryan, and Chloe was an inconvenience. That's not true. Then where is she now, Harper? I pulled up my phone and showed her the screen where I'd pulled up a recent photo Thomas had taken of Chloe leaving her night job. Where is this daughter you were supposedly protecting? Harper stared at the photo, and for a moment, something that might have been genuine emotion flickered across her face. Chloe looked tired in the picture, wearing a security guard uniform, walking to her car in an empty parking lot at 3 a.m. Harper's voice faltered. She's working 2 jobs to put herself through community college. She lives in a studio apartment that costs 3/4 of her income. She has no family, no support system, no safety net of any kind because her mother decided she was an inconvenience. The room was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. On the screen, the video had finally ended, replaced by the country club's usual events calendar as if nothing had happened. Jason stood up slowly, his movements careful and deliberate, like someone who wasn't sure his legs would support him. I need to leave." "Jason, wait!" Harper reached for his arm, but he stepped away from her touch. "Don't," he said quietly. "Just don't." He turned to Ryan. "Son, are you coming with me?" Ryan looked between his parents, confusion and hurt warring across his young face. Finally, he nodded and stood up. "This isn't over," Harper said, her voice taking on a hard edge as she watched her family preparing to leave her sitting alone. "You think you've won something here, Evelyn? You think destroying my marriage makes you the hero?" I gathered my purse and stood to follow my son and grandson. Before I left, I turned back to face her one last time. "I didn't destroy your marriage, Harper. I just made sure your husband knew who he was really married to." As we walked through the dining room toward the exit, I could feel dozens of eyes following our progress. Tomorrow, this story would spread through every social circle that mattered to Harper. Her carefully constructed image as the perfect wife and mother would be replaced by the truth about who she really was. But as satisfying as that thought was, I knew this was just the beginning. The first shot in Harper's counterattack came exactly 48 hours after the restaurant incident, delivered in the form of a heartbroken phone call from my youngest daughter, Amanda, who lived 3 states away. "Mom, what's going on?" Amanda's voice was tight with concern. "Harper called me this morning crying. She said, you've been trying to destroy her marriage for months." I was in my garden, deadheading roses in the early morning quiet when my phone rang. The peace of the morning shattered with my daughter's words, and I sat down heavily on my garden bench. She said, "What?" "She told me you hired someone to spy on her, that you ambushed her at Ryan's graduation dinner with some kind of setup." Mom, she was sobbing. She said you're trying to turn the whole family against her because you've never accepted her. The careful way Amanda spoke told me everything I needed to know. Harper had gotten to her first, had painted herself as the victim and me as the villain. I could practically hear the script my daughter-in-law had used, probably the same one she was spreading to anyone who would listen. "Amanda, there's more to this story than what Harper told you. I know you two have never gotten along perfectly, but Mom, she said you violated her privacy. She said you had her followed." There was a pause, and when Amanda spoke again, her voice was smaller. "Did you really do that?" I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of having to defend actions that shouldn't need defending. "Yes, I did, but not for the reasons she told you." "Then why?" "How do you explain to your daughter that her brother's wife is a predator? How do you tell her that the woman who's been part of family gatherings for 15 years casually abandoned her own child?" "She has another daughter, Amanda. A daughter she abandoned when the girl was 15 years old." Silence on the other end of the line. Then, quietly, "What?" "Her name is Chloe. She's 23 now, working 2 jobs to put herself through community college with no family support. Because Harper legally severed all ties with her, she made sure Chloe could never contact her again." Another long pause. "Are you sure?" "I have court documents, video recordings, everything." But even as I said it, I could hear the doubt creeping into Amanda's voice. "Mom, that seems extreme, even for someone you don't like. Are you sure you're not misunderstanding something?" And there it was. The seed Harper had planted was already taking root. My own daughter was questioning my judgment, my motives, my version of events. This was how Harper operated. I'd learned that much from Thomas's investigation. She didn't just abandon people. She systematically destroyed their credibility first, making sure that when the truth came out, it would be dismissed as the vindictive lies of someone with an agenda. After I hung up with Amanda, I sat in my garden for a long time, watching the sun climb higher in the sky and thinking about warfare. Most people think battles are won with dramatic gestures, big moments of triumph, but Harper understood something more sophisticated. She knew that the most effective way to win a war was to make your enemy defeat themselves. By the time my neighbor Marlene came by for our usual afternoon tea, I had received similar calls from 2 cousins, Jason's sister Diane, and even Ryan's girlfriend Lily. All of them had heard some version of the same story. Poor Harper, victimized by a bitter mother-in-law who couldn't accept that her son had found happiness. "I don't want to take sides," Marlene said carefully as she settled into my kitchen chair with her cup of Earl Grey. "But people are talking, Evelyn, and some of what they're saying, well, it doesn't make you look very good." "What exactly are they saying?" Marlene shifted uncomfortably. "That you've been jealous of Harper from the beginning, that you resented how happy she made Jason, how perfect their family seemed. They're saying you hired that investigator to dig up dirt on her, and when you couldn't find anything really damaging, you took things out of context to make her look bad." Out of context. I couldn't keep the edge out of my voice. "Marlene, she abandoned her 15-year-old daughter. She legally erased her own child. How is that out of context?" "Well, according to what I heard, the girl was troubled. Acting out, getting into drugs, maybe. And Harper was young and scared and thought the girl would be better off with other family members who could handle her better." I stared at my oldest friend, watching her repeat Harper's lies with the conviction of someone who wanted to believe them. "Where did you hear that version?" "Harper called me yesterday. She was so upset, Evelyn. She said she'd been planning to tell Jason about Chloe when the time was right, but you forced her hand by making it public. She said the whole situation was more complicated than it looked." Of course Harper had called Marlene. She was working her way through my entire support system, rewriting history, conversation by conversation. "Did she mention that Chloe has been completely on her own since she was 17? That she aged out of foster care with no family support?" Marlene frowned. "She said the girl chose to cut contact with the family, that Chloe was angry about the custody arrangement and refused to maintain relationships." Lies wrapped in just enough plausible detail to sound credible. Harper had clearly spent the last 2 days crafting a narrative that transformed her from predator to victim, from abandoner to abandoned. The really masterful part was how she'd positioned my investigation as the real betrayal, by focusing on my violation of privacy rather than what that investigation had uncovered. She'd made me the villain in my own story. That evening, Jason called. "Mom, we need to talk." His voice was careful, controlled in a way that made my stomach clench. This wasn't the voice of a son calling his mother. This was the voice of someone who'd been convinced he needed to manage a difficult situation. "Of course, sweetheart. Do you want to come over for dinner?" "Actually, I think it would be better if we met somewhere neutral. How about that coffee shop on Elm Street tomorrow at 2? Neutral. As if I were some kind of threat that needed to be contained in a public space. The next afternoon, I arrived at the coffee shop 15 minutes early and chose a table in the back corner where we could talk privately. Jason walked in exactly at 2, and the way he moved, purposeful, resigned, told me this wasn't going to be the conversation I'd hoped. He sat down across from me without ordering anything, his hands folded on the table like he was preparing to deliver bad news. "Mom, I've been doing a lot of thinking since graduation night. I imagine you have. The thing is, what you did, having Harper investigated, ambushing her in public like that, it wasn't right. No matter what you found out, that wasn't the way to handle it." I felt something cold settle in my chest. And what would have been the right way? "Mom, you should have come to me privately. We could have talked about it as a family, worked through whatever issues you had with my wife." "Issues I had?" I repeated carefully. "Jason, this isn't about me not liking Harper. This is about her abandoning her own child. According to Harper, the situation with Chloe was more complicated than what you saw in that video. She said she was trying to do what was best for a troubled teenager and that you deliberately took her words out of context to make her look as bad as possible." There it was. The rewritten history delivered by my own son with the earnest conviction of someone who desperately wanted to believe it. Did she also tell you that Chloe has been working 2 jobs to survive? That she has no family support system? Jason's jaw tightened. She told me that Chloe chose to cut contact with the family, that she was angry about the custody arrangement and refused to maintain relationships. Lies wrapped in just enough plausible detail to sound credible. Harper had clearly spent the last 2 days crafting a narrative that transformed her from predator to victim, from abandoner to abandoned. The really masterful part was how she'd positioned my investigation as the real betrayal, by focusing on my violation of privacy rather than what that investigation had uncovered. She'd made me the villain in my own story. That evening, Jason called. "Mom, we need to talk." His voice was careful, controlled in a way that made my stomach clench. This wasn't the voice of a son calling his mother. This was the voice of someone who'd been convinced he needed to manage a difficult situation. "Of course, sweetheart. Do you want to come over for dinner?" "Actually, I think it would be better if we met somewhere neutral. How about that coffee shop on Elm Street tomorrow at 2? Neutral. As if I were some kind of threat that needed to be contained in a public space. The next afternoon, I arrived at the coffee shop 15 minutes early and chose a table in the back corner where we could talk privately. Jason walked in exactly at 2, and the way he moved, purposeful, resigned, told me this wasn't going to be the conversation I'd hoped. He sat down across from me without ordering anything, his hands folded on the table like he was preparing to deliver bad news. "Mom, I've been doing a lot of thinking since graduation night. I imagine you have. The thing is, what you did, having Harper investigated, ambushing her in public like that, it wasn't right. No matter what you found out, that wasn't the way to handle it." I felt something cold settle in my chest. "And what would have been the right way?" "Mom, you should have come to me privately. We could have talked about it as a family, worked through whatever issues you had with my wife." "Issues I had?" I repeated carefully. "Jason, this isn't about me not liking Harper. This is about her abandoning her own child." According to Harper, the situation with Chloe was more complicated than what you saw in that video. She said she was trying to do what was best for a troubled teenager and that you deliberately took her words out of context to make her look as bad as possible. There it was, the rewritten history delivered by my own son with the earnest conviction of someone who desperately wanted to believe it. Did she also tell you that Chloe has been working 2 jobs to survive? That she has no family support system at all? Jason's jaw tightened. "She told me that Chloe chose to cut off contact with the family, that she was angry about the custody situation and refused to accept help." "And you believe that?" "I believe my wife," he said firmly. "And frankly, Mom, the fact that you went to such lengths to dig up her past makes me question your motives." I stared at my son, seeing Harper's handiwork written across his face like graffiti. She'd taken his natural loyalty and twisted it into a weapon against me. My motives? I kept my voice level, but inside I was screaming. "Jason, I was trying to protect this family." From what? From a woman who made some difficult decisions as a young mother? From someone who was trying to start fresh and build a better life? From someone who is capable of abandoning her own child when that child becomes inconvenient. You don't know. That's what happened. I know exactly what happened. I have the documentation. Documentation that you obtained by violating her privacy and trust. Jason leaned forward, his voice taking on an edge I'd rarely heard directed at me. "Mom, I need you to understand something. Harper is my wife. She's the mother of my son, and what you did to her was cruel and vindictive." The words hit me like physical blows. My own son, the child I'd raised and sacrificed for, was defending the woman who'd erased her own daughter from existence. So, what happens now? I asked quietly, though I already feared the answer. Jason looked away for a moment, his fingers curling and uncurling slightly on the table, betraying tension beneath his calm voice. Now we all try to move forward. Harper has agreed to consider family counseling to work through the issues that led to the situation, but she needs to know that she's safe from future attacks. Attacks? My voice sharpened despite myself. She's afraid of you, Mom. She's afraid of what else you might try to do to hurt her. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Harper? Afraid of me? The woman who had calmly erased her own daughter from legal existence, who had manipulated my family into believing I was the threat, she was the one who was frightened now. And what about Chloe? I asked. David, if what you say about her situation is true, Jason began, briefly slipping and using my first husband's name by mistake, then maybe we can find a way to help her. But that's something Harper and I need to decide together, as a family. As a family. The phrase stung with finality. It was a polite way of reminding me that I was now an outsider. My place had shifted. I wasn't part of the decision-making anymore. I was merely the mother-in-law who had overstepped. As Jason left the coffee shop, I realized that Harper had won the first round of this war more decisively than I had imagined. She hadn't just survived the exposure. I'd handed her the tools to reposition herself as the victim. She used my reveal to isolate me, to cast doubt on my integrity, to reframe the narrative so completely that even my own daughter questioned me. She hadn't defended her abandonment of Chloe. She'd redefined it. But what she didn't understand was that I'd been fighting battles longer than she'd been alive. And I wasn't nearly finished yet. 2 weeks after the devastating coffee shop conversation with Jason, I was in my kitchen making dinner for one when the doorbell rang. It was nearly 7 p.m. in the evening, and I wasn't expecting anyone. Since the graduation dinner incident, my social calendar had become notably lighter, as people in my circle tried to navigate the awkward waters of choosing sides in a family drama they didn't fully understand. When I opened the door, I found myself face to face with a young woman who took my breath away. She had Jason's eyes and Harper's delicate bone structure, but there was something in her expression that was entirely her own, a quiet strength mixed with nervous determination. Mrs. Evelyn, my name is Chloe Phillips. I think we need to talk. My legs nearly gave out. After months of investigating her life from a distance, seeing her standing on my doorstep felt surreal, like a character from a book had stepped into reality. Chloe, I gripped the doorframe to steady myself. How did you find me? It wasn't easy. She shifted a worn backpack on her shoulder. But when someone hires a private investigator to look into your life, word eventually gets back to you, especially in a city as small as Portland. Of course, Thomas had been discreet but not invisible. In my focus on gathering information about Chloe, I hadn't considered that she might become aware of the investigation. I know this is strange, she continued, but I drove down from Portland because I had to understand why someone was asking questions about me. And what I learned, she paused, her voice catching slightly, what I learned changed everything I thought I knew about my life. I stepped aside to let her in, my mind racing. Please come in. Can I get you something to eat? You must be tired from the drive. Coffee would be great, if you have it. As I busied myself making coffee, Chloe stood in my kitchen looking around with curious eyes. She was smaller than I'd expected from Thomas's photos, probably barely 5'3", but there was a presence about her that filled the room. So, you're Harper's in-law? I am. And you're her daughter? Apparently, though I spent the last 8 years believing she was dead. I nearly dropped the coffee pot. What? Chloe sat down at my kitchen table, the same table where Thomas had first shown me the documents that exposed Harper's lies. When I aged out of foster care, I tried to find her. I hired a cheap investigator with money I had saved from my first job. He came back and told me my mother had died in a car accident 2 years earlier. The coffee maker gurgled in the silence that followed her words. I felt like I was drowning in the enormity of what she was telling me. He showed me a death certificate and everything, said he tracked down her last known address and found records of her death. I grieved for her. Mrs. Evelyn, I spent 3 years going to therapy to work through my feelings about losing a mother I'd barely known. But she wasn't dead. No, she was here, playing happy family with my son and grandson while you were working night shifts to pay for community college classes. Chloe's voice was steady, but I could see her hands trembling slightly around her coffee cup. Do you know what it's like to find out that your mother not only abandoned you, but paid someone to make you believe she was dead? The room spun slightly as the full scope of Harper's cruelty hit me again. It wasn't enough for her to abandon Chloe. She had to make sure the girl could never find her, never disrupt her new life. How did you find out the truth? Your investigator was good, but not perfect. When he started asking questions in Portland, it got back to the woman who used to clean my grandmother's house. She remembered me, remembered my situation. She also remembered that my mother had paid her to spread the story about the car accident if anyone ever came looking. I sat down heavily across from Chloe, feeling physically sick. She paid someone to fake her own death? A few hundred to make sure her past stayed buried. Chloe's laugh was hollow. Cheaper than child support, I guess. Chloe, I'm so sorry. I had no idea she'd gone that far. It's not your fault. Chloe studied my face carefully. But I need to understand. Why were you investigating me? What does my mother's abandoned daughter have to do with your family? So, I told her everything about the private investigator, about the video, about the confrontation at the restaurant. I told her about Jason's refusal to believe the truth, about how Harper had managed to paint herself as the victim in her own story. When I finished, Chloe sat quietly for a long time, processing what I'd shared. She has a son, she said finally. My half-brother, Ryan. He's 22, just graduated from Harvard Law School, and he doesn't know about me. He does now, I said. He was there when the video played. Chloe nodded slowly. What did he say? He was shocked, confused, but Harper has been working very hard to control the narrative since then. She's convinced most of the family that the situation was more complicated than it appeared. Complicated how? I hesitated not to repeat Harper's lies, but Chloe needed to know what she was up against. She's telling people you were troubled, that you had substance abuse issues, that you were acting out. She's saying she made the difficult decision to let you be raised by family members who could better handle your problems. Chloe's coffee cup hit the table with enough force to slush liquid over the rim. Substance abuse? Acting out? Her voice rose with indignation. Mrs. Evelyn, I was 15 years old when my mother disappeared from my life without explanation. My grandmother was 78 and had arthritis so bad she could barely take care of herself. I was getting A's in school and working a part-time job to help pay for groceries. I know. I've seen your school records. Then you know she's lying. I do. But unfortunately, I added quietly, my family seems more inclined to believe her version. Chloe stood up and walked to my kitchen window, staring out at the garden where I had been working when Amanda called me to tell me about Harper's damage control campaign. I want to meet them. Who? My half-brother. Your son. I want them to hear the truth from me directly. My stomach clenched with worry. Chloe, I don't think that's a good idea. Harper has had weeks to prepare them for something like this. She'll have an explanation ready. Then I guess we'll see how convincing her explanations are when I'm standing right there to contradict them. There was something in Chloe's voice that reminded me of myself at her age, a quiet determination that wouldn't be swayed by other people's comfort or convenience. What do you want from this? What are you hoping to accomplish? Chloe turned back to face me, and I saw tears gathering in her eyes for the first time since she'd arrived. I want my half-brother to know that I exist. I want him to know that our mother is capable of erasing her own children when they become inconvenient. And I want to make sure it never happens to him. The weight of her words settled over the kitchen like dust after an explosion. Chloe wasn't here for revenge or for money or to shatter anyone's carefully constructed peace. She was here to protect a brother she had never met, from a mother who had already proven she was capable of unthinkable cruelty. Her words stayed with me long after she'd gone to sleep in the guest room that night. This wasn't about past grievances. This was about the future, Ryan's future, and whether Harper could ever be trusted again. The next morning, we made plans. There was a family barbecue that Saturday, hosted at Jason and Harper's house. It was supposed to be a healing gathering, a chance for everyone to move past what had happened at the restaurant. Harper had framed it as a step toward unity, a fresh start. I knew better. It was a PR stunt. But Chloe saw it as an opportunity. "Will you take me?" she asked quietly. I thought about the family's mood, about Jason's cold distance, Amanda's uncertainty, the cousins and neighbors whose sympathies had begun to waver. I thought about how Harper would spin it, about how she might weaponize Chloe's appearance as another ambush, another ploy. But I also thought about Ryan. He deserved to know. "Yes," I said. "I'll take you." Saturday arrived, gray and drizzly. The kind of Pacific Northwest weather that settled on everything and made the world feel heavier. Chloe arrived early, her small suitcase in hand, prepared to stay through the weekend if needed. We sat in my car outside Jason's house for several minutes, watching through the windows as my family moved about inside, arranging chairs, lighting the grill, pouring wine. "Are you ready for this?" I asked. She smoothed down her simple blue dress, the kind of outfit someone wears when they want to look respectable but can't afford anything fancy. "No," she said, "but I don't think I'll ever be ready, so we might as well get it over with." I knocked on the front door instead of using my key, a small acknowledgement that my status had changed. Jason opened it, his face moving through several expressions in rapid succession: surprise, confusion, and, finally, a carefully neutral calm. "Mom? I wasn't sure you were coming." "I brought someone I'd like you to meet." I stepped aside. Chloe stood tall, her eyes steady. Jason's breath caught audibly. Even someone determined to disbelieve couldn't miss the resemblance. "This is Chloe Phillips, your stepdaughter." For a long moment, Jason just stared at her, mouth slightly open, silent. Then a noise behind him, a glass shattering in the kitchen. Harper's voice followed seconds later, full of false cheerfulness. "Jason, who's at the door?" Chloe didn't flinch. "I think," she said quietly, "it's time for a real family reunion." The moment Chloe stepped into that living room, the atmosphere shifted. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Relatives who'd spent weeks debating my version of events stared at the living embodiment of Harper's lie. Harper stood frozen in the kitchen doorway, a dish towel clutched in her hand. Her face drained of color. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked genuinely afraid. "Chloe?" Ryan's voice came from the couch, where he'd been sitting with Lily. He stood slowly, his eyes locked on Chloe's. You're my sister?" "Half-sister," she corrected gently. "But yes." The resemblance was striking now that they were side by side. Jason's warm brown eyes, Harper's cheekbones. "I don't understand," Jason said, voice strained. "If you're really Harper's daughter, why didn't you contact us before now?" Chloe gave a soft, bitter laugh. "Because until 2 weeks ago, I thought my mother was dead." The silence that followed her words was thunderous. You could have heard a pin drop on the patio bricks. "That's not possible," Harper finally said, her voice high and brittle. "Chloe, sweetheart, you know that's not true. You were angry when I remarried. You chose to cut contact with me." "No," Chloe said firmly. I was 15 when you signed papers terminating your parental rights. I was 17 when I aged out of foster care with no family support. I was 20 when I hired an investigator to find you, only to be told you died in a car accident. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. These are the documents, the court papers you signed, the fake death certificate someone gave the investigator, even receipts showing payments to ensure the story held up. Jason's hand shook as he opened the folder. I watched his face change as he read the proof of his wife's deception. You paid someone to fake your death? His voice was barely a whisper. Jason, you have to understand. The situation was complicated. Chloe was going through a difficult phase. I was getting straight A's. I worked part-time to help my elderly grandmother buy groceries. The only thing I was going through was wondering why my mother vanished. She turned to face the room, her voice growing steadier, louder. I want everyone here to understand something. I didn't come here for money or revenge or to break up your family. I came here because I found out the mother I grieved was actually alive, and I need you to know who she really is. What's your life been like since she left? Ryan asked, stepping forward. His face was serious, older somehow, than he looked just days ago. Hard, Chloe said. I've worked 2 jobs for the past 5 years to put myself through community college. I live in a studio apartment that takes most of my income. No safety net, no one to call when things fall apart. She paused. But I'm still here, and I'm not ashamed of what I've survived. Oh, sweetheart, Diane said from across the room. We had no idea. Because you were never supposed to. She made sure of that. Harper backed further into the kitchen. You don't understand. None of you understand how complicated it was. Then explain it, Jason said, his voice hard now. Explain how abandoning your child and faking your death was the right choice. Harper's facade crumbled completely. She wasn't my responsibility anymore. The room recoiled as her mask finally dropped. I had a new life, a new family. I couldn't let the past follow me. I couldn't let it ruin everything I built. The honesty of the statement hit like a physical blow. I saw heads turn away. I saw people physically shift back. So, you just erased her, Ryan said quietly. You erased your own daughter. I did what I had to do, Harper shouted. You think it was easy? You think I wanted to give up my child? But I had to choose between my past and my future. I chose my future. You chose yourself, Chloe said simply. You chose your comfort over your child's life. Jason looked up from the documents. His face, haunted. Get out, he said. Harper blinked. Jason? Get out of my house. Get out of my life. Get away from my family. Your family? Harper's voice turned sharp. Half of this house is mine. Half of everything in it. Actually, Jason said, his tone grim and final, the prenup you insisted on works both ways. Fraud, misrepresentation. I've already spoken to my lawyer. Harper paled. You wouldn't. Abandoning your child, faking your death. That's more than misrepresentation. It's moral bankruptcy. Jason stepped aside. Go. Harper turned, searching for even one sympathetic face. But there were none. Even the relatives who had defended her now stared with open disgust. You'll regret this, all of you. You don't know what you're throwing away. A liar and a child abandoner, Chloe said softly. I think we'll manage. Harper didn't say another word. She turned, grabbed her purse from the side table, and stormed out of the house, slamming the front door behind her with such force that it rattled the windows. A tense silence hung over the room in her absence, the kind that follows a storm but leaves everyone drenched. Slowly, people began to move again. Chairs were shuffled. Someone turned off the Bluetooth speaker in the backyard. But no one left. No one followed Harper. And that told me everything I needed to know. Diane crossed the room and sat beside Chloe, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I'm so sorry," she said softly. "You should never have had to carry all of that alone." Chloe offered her a small smile, one that wobbled at the corners. "Thank you." Ryan pulled up a chair across from her. "What are you studying?" he asked, his voice cautious but curious. Chloe blinked, surprised. "Social work. I want to help kids who age out of the system like I did." That's that's amazing," Ryan said, nodding slowly. "I think you're incredible." Chloe flushed with color for the first time all day, a soft pink touching her cheeks. Lily, who had been quietly observing from the edge of the room, offered Chloe a cup of lemonade. "This family's a little nuts," she said with a smirk, "but it's full of heart. You'll fit right in." And just like that, the tension that had blanketed the room began to lift. One story at a time, Chloe shared pieces of her life, her 2 jobs, her small apartment, her college struggles, her dreams. People listened, people cared, and more importantly, people believed her. I watched from the kitchen archway, letting the moment unfold, letting the cracks in Harper's narrative be replaced with something real. For the first time in weeks, I felt hope take root again. Chloe belonged here, not because she had to fight for it, not because she'd made a scene or demanded attention, but because she was part of this family in a way Harper never truly had been. She was open, raw, and honest, 3 things Harper had spent years avoiding. Ryan asked more questions. Diane offered to help with scholarships. Even Lily offered to put Chloe in touch with a friend who worked in the Department of Human Services. The conversation turned naturally, effortlessly, and Harper's absence didn't seem to cast a shadow anymore. It was like she'd taken the weight of deception with her when she left. "I can't believe I have a sister," Ryan said, shaking his head. "Half-sister," Chloe corrected for the 3rd time. "Sister," Ryan repeated. "The half part is just biology. Sisters are about choice." I turned away, tears gathering in my eyes. I hadn't expected healing to happen this fast, or this fully, but Chloe's presence hadn't reopened old wounds, it had stitched new ones closed. Later that evening, after most of the guests had gone and the grill had gone cold, Jason stood beside me on the back porch, watching Chloe and Ryan sit on the swing, talking and laughing like they'd known each other all their lives. "You were right," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "About everything." I didn't speak. I didn't have to. He continued, "I let her manipulate me. I let her isolate me from my own mother, from the truth. I wanted to believe her so badly I ignored every red flag." "Because you're a good man," I said softly, "and good men always want to believe the best in the people they love." "But she didn't deserve that belief. She never did." He turned to me, his eyes glistening with something close to guilt. "I'm sorry, Mom, for not trusting you, for making you feel like you were the problem." I reached for his hand and squeezed it. "You came around. That's what matters." We stood in silence for a moment, just breathing in the cool night air. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now we rebuild. Stronger. Together." Over the next few weeks, our family underwent a transformation I hadn't thought possible. Chloe moved in with Ryan temporarily, sharing his guest room until she could get a place of her own closer to school. Jason took over helping with her tuition, refusing to let her struggle any longer. Amanda called every other day to apologize for doubting me and to get to know her newfound niece. Even Marlene dropped off a pie and said, "I should have known better. Harper was too smooth." Harper, true to form, didn't go quietly. Within days of her departure, her lawyer had reached out to Jason's lawyer with a list of demands. But when the prenup was presented alongside the evidence, including signed court documents and the recorded video, Harper's leverage crumbled. The divorce was finalized faster than anyone expected. She moved out of state, disappeared the same way she once vanished from Chloe's life, leaving only confusion and ashes in her wake. And somehow, we were fine without her. Better, in fact. Sundays at my house turned into family dinners again. Chloe helped me cook, always eager to learn old recipes. Jason and Ryan would argue over college football. Lily brought new board games. And Diane started a group chat titled Evelyn's Army, where we shared family updates and holiday plans. 6 months passed in the blink of an eye. Chloe had not only become a part of our family, she'd become its heart. She'd opened us up, connected the frayed threads Harper had tried to snap. One crisp October Sunday, I stood in my kitchen, stirring a pot of stew, when Chloe entered holding a small wrapped gift. "For you," she said, handing it to me shyly. I opened it to find a framed photo of all of us. Me, Jason, Ryan, Chloe, and even Lily, standing in my backyard. Someone had written on the bottom, "The family we choose." "I don't know what to say," I whispered. Chloe stepped forward and hugged me tightly. "Say you'll let me keep calling you Grandma." I nodded, tears choking me. "You always were." From the living room, I heard Ryan shout, "Dinner smells amazing! Hurry up, Grandma!" And for the first time in years, I smiled without hesitation. We weren't perfect, but we were whole. Sunday dinner that evening was filled with the kind of laughter that shakes walls and fills hearts. Chloe sat at the dining table, helping Lily fold napkins, while Ryan tried to set the table with exaggerated flair, flipping forks into the air like a magician. Jason uncorked a bottle of red wine, raising an eyebrow at me before saying, "Let's make tonight official. No more ghosts at this table." We toasted to new beginnings, and as the clinking of glasses echoed through the house, I looked around the table and realized how different things had become. A year ago, we were a family trapped in illusion, with Harper's influence wrapped around our lives like ivy, choking every honest conversation, every real emotion. Now, that weight was gone, and in its place was a woman who had fought through abandonment and heartbreak to find us. Not for what we could give her, but for who we were. Chloe passed me a plate of roasted vegetables, her smile easy and warm. "Grandma, I meant to ask, can you teach me how to make that cinnamon apple crumble you made last week?" "Of course," I said, beaming. "We'll start next Sunday." "That's perfect," she replied. "My professor's birthday's coming up. He's been so kind to me, like a second chance wrapped in a grade book." Jason laughed. "Only Chloe would think someone with pie." Ryan nudged her shoulder. "You thanked me with one last week." "Exactly," she replied, winking, "and you still did my laundry." The banter flowed as naturally as the meal itself. There was no tension, no walking on eggshells. Everyone was present, not just physically, but emotionally, deeply, vulnerably. After dinner, we gathered in the living room. Chloe brought out an old photo album I'd let her borrow the week before. It was filled with pictures of Jason and Amanda growing up, of Ryan as a baby, of my late husband with a pipe in his hand and a soft smile on his face. "That's your grandfather," I told Chloe, tapping a photo of him cradling Jason in a hammock. "He would have adored you." "He looks like Ryan," she whispered. "Same jawline." "Strong and kind," I said. That's how he was. Lily curled up beside Ryan on the couch, smiling at the stories Chloe and I told. "You know," Lily said, "this family has gone through hell and come back better. That's not common." "It's because we didn't run from the truth. We let it walk in and take a seat." That night, after everyone left and the house was quiet again, I sat alone at the kitchen table with the photo Chloe had given me the week before. "The family we choose," the caption said. But Chloe wasn't just a choice. She was a blessing, a missing piece that had made the rest of us stronger by simply stepping into her rightful place. In the weeks that followed, Chloe started doing small volunteer shifts with local youth outreach. Ryan helped her design a website for her future nonprofit. Jason called her every morning just to say hi. Amanda made plans to fly out for Thanksgiving. Even Diane took her shopping and insisted she pick out a better winter coat. We wrapped around her like roots around a tree, giving her the stability she never had but had always deserved. Then, one morning, a letter arrived in my mailbox. It was postmarked from an out-of-state address I didn't recognize. The handwriting on the envelope was Harper's. I opened it with steady hands. Inside was a single page. The letter was brief, cold. You got what you wanted. They chose you. Congratulations. You'll never hear from me again. There was no signature, no apology, just a declaration of surrender. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer, not because I needed to keep it, but because I wanted to remember that even someone as manipulative as Harper could lose when the truth was strong enough. That evening, Chloe found me in the garden, trimming the roses I'd nearly let die over the past months of emotional upheaval. "You okay?" she asked, kneeling beside me. "Yes," I said honestly. "Better than I've been in years." "Was that from her?" "Yes." "What did she say?" "Goodbye." Chloe looked down at the petals in my basket, her fingers tracing the edge of one. It's strange. I thought I'd want to yell at her, scream. But now that she's gone, I just feel done. "That's called healing," I said gently. "You don't need revenge to move on. You need peace. And I think you found it." Chloe looked up at me, and in that moment, I saw the girl she had been and the woman she had become converge. The trauma hadn't defined her. It had shaped her, yes, but she had taken control of her own story and rewritten the ending. "Thank you," she said, "for everything." "No," I said, taking her hand. "Thank you for surviving long enough to find us." As the sun set over the garden, painting the sky in shades of peach and rose, I realized that the most powerful revenge I had ever enacted wasn't the video or the exposure. It was this moment. It was watching a forgotten daughter bloom in the soil that Harper had abandoned. It was rebuilding a family, not through lies or image, but with truth, love, and persistence. And perhaps most of all, it was knowing that Harper would never be able to rewrite this chapter anymore. Chloe had stepped into the light, and our family, reshaped by honesty, had welcomed her home. Now, I'm curious about you, who listened to my story. What would you have done if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.